Hi, in this video I'm going to demonstrate how to build an interface screen in the TX Modular system. To start with, I'll show you one of the examples that comes with the TX Modular. The file is called Interface Widgets. This has working examples of all the different types of widget. Widgets are things like knobs, sliders, buttons, and number boxes. To see how the interface is built, you can look at the Design Interface screen, which shows all the widget settings. If I open the main help index, there's a help file called TX5 Building an Interface. This has lots of details about interface building. I'll close the help file for now. Before I make an interface, I'm going to clear the current system using this button, which deletes all the modules. Now I can create a new system from scratch. I'll go to the Modules and Channels window. I'll press the plus source button, and I'll go to the category Audio Polyphonic. I'll add a PluckSynth module. Then I'll go to the category Control Sequencer, and I'll add a Step Sequencer module. I'll connect the PluckSynth channel to the main outputs. I'll turn up the level, but we won't hear anything yet. Now I'll set up the Step Sequencer. First I'll set the output so it will trigger notes in the PluckSynth. Then I'll go to the Processes page, and I'll open the process Generate Notes from Chord Mode Scale. I'll set it to generate notes in the C harmonic minor scale. I'll set the note range using a preset of 3 octaves from C2 to C5. Now if I press the Run Process button, it'll generate C harmonic minor notes in all of the 64 steps. Now I'll go to the Patterns page. I'll set the play range from steps 1 to 64, so all the steps will play. Now I'll go to the Steps page. This shows all the notes that we've just generated. I can scroll through them. Now I'll select Probability. I'll set the probability of step 1 to 75%. Now I'll press the Clone 1 button, which copies step 1 to all the other steps. Now if I start the Step Sequencer, it plays the PluckSynth using the notes that we just generated. Because we set the probability to 75%, only about 3/4 of the steps will play. This breaks up the pattern a bit. For now I'll stop the Step Sequencer and I'll use the plus Insert button. I'll go to the category Audio Delay. I'll drag a delay into the PluckSynth channel. I'll set the delay time to 1750 milliseconds, which sounded good when I was testing it. I'll set the feedback to about 70%. And I'll set the dry-wet mix to about 50%. Lastly, I'll go to the category Audio Modulation. I'll drag a flanger into the PluckSynth channel, and I'll set the dry-wet mix to about 20%. Now if I start the sequencer, we can hear the notes play. I'll stop it for now. One thing to point out is that the Step Sequencer has Sync Start and Sync Stop turned on by default. This means that the Sync Start and Sync Stop buttons, which are here at the top of the window, can control the Step Sequencer independently. This is useful, for example, if you're in a different window from the sequencer, you can still start and stop it using these buttons. Also, if you have more than one sequencer, you can start and stop them all together using the sync buttons. Now I'll open the design interface window. There are 20 screens available to build the interface, which you can select here. On the screen there are two sliding panels which can change their size. The left-hand panel shows the interface that you're designing. Here, to begin with, it just has a label saying Screen 1. The right-hand panel is for adding and editing widgets. I'll add a knob by clicking and dragging from the knob button, and I'll drop it into the interface. Dragging inside the corner boxes can be used to change the size of a single widget. The corner boxes don't appear if several widgets are selected, only if one is. You can copy widgets by using the Command button and then clicking and dragging from another widget to copy it. If you click and drag from an empty space over several widgets, you create a group. The group can then be dragged around. There's a red box around all the widgets in the group. If you use the Command key with dragging, the whole group can be copied. By using the Shift key, you can add more widgets to the group. Now I'll select all but one of the knobs and delete them with the Delete button. Now I'll select the single knob and edit the settings in the right-hand panel. First, there are settings for the screen, such as its width and color and height. Below that are settings for the widget. If you've selected none or more than one widget, nothing appears in the widget section. If I select just the single knob, the widget details appear. The last section is called Widget Actions. Here I can connect the widget to any parameters from any of the modules in the system. In this case, I'm going to connect it to the Channel 1 level. If I go to the Modules and Channels window, you can see that the PluckSynth is in Channel 1. So if I go back to the Design Interface window, I can set the module to Channel 1. And I'll set the parameter to Set Level. If I turn on the MIDI Learn button, I can now wiggle a MIDI knob that I've got connected, and it copies all the MIDI details into the settings and turns on MIDI Listen. One thing to point out about MIDI is that you always need to connect any MIDI interfaces before you start the TX modular system. Now I'll go to the Run Interface window and sync start the sequencer, and I can test that the volume knob works both with the mouse and with MIDI. Another important point is that the interface widget is only active when the screen it's on is being displayed. So if you go to another screen while moving the MIDI controller, it'll have no effect. It only works when you switch back to the interface screen that it's on. So now if I go to interface screen 2 and move the MIDI knob, the volume doesn't change. Only when I go back to screen 1 will the MIDI knob work. If you did want to permanently connect a MIDI controller, you can add a module called MIDI controller and connect it into your system through a channel. Then it'll always work, no matter what screen is showing. Anyway, getting back to building the interface, I'll stop the sequencer now. I'll go back to the design window, and I'll drag a label box next to the knob. In the settings, I can type in volume as the label text. Now if I go to the Run Interface window, you can see how it looks. Another way to add widgets is to import them directly from a module. This is often quicker because the settings are already set for you. I'll show you. If I go to the Design Interface window and press the Import Widget from Module button, then all the modules in the system are displayed. If I select the Step Sequencer module and set the parameter to Set BPM, then all the possible widgets I could import are displayed underneath. If I drag a label to the interface, it's labeled BPM automatically. If I drag a slider number H to the interface, it adds a horizontal slider together with a number box, and it shows 120, which is the BPM of the step sequencer. In the widget properties, we can see how it's correctly set to step sequencer set BPM. Now I'll import some more widgets, selecting the flanger and set dry wet mix. I'll add a label and slider number H. I'll change the label to flanger mix. Now I'll select add new widget because that has some extra widgets such as action buttons and also a 2D slider. I'll drag a 2D slider into the interface. I'll make it a bit bigger and I'll add a label and I'll also make that the same size. Now I'll select the 2D slider and label together by dragging over them. Then I'll use Command and drag to make 2 more copies. I'll edit the first label. I'll change the text to pluck, morph and filtering. I'll edit the second label and I'll change the text to flanger, freak and feedback. I'll edit the third label and I'll change the text to flanger LFO rate depth. I'll edit the first 2D slider. I'll set the x-axis to pluck synth set pick morph. I'll set the y-axis to pluck synth set filtering. I'll edit the second 2D slider. I'll set the x-axis to flanger set frequency and the y-axis to flanger set feedback. I'll edit the third slider. I'll set the x-axis to flanger set LFO rate and the y-axis to flanger set LFO depth. Now I'll add an action button which I'll drag next to the BPM slider and I'll make it a bit smaller. I'll set the text to random. In the widget actions, I'll set the module to step sequencer. I'll set the action to randomize BPM. I'll copy the action button using Command and drag. I'll set the text to 120. I'll set the action to set BPM. And I'll set the value to 120. One thing to point out is that most widgets, such as a slider or knob, are only able to set values. An action button can do many more things, such as randomizing a value. Finally, I'll select the Screen 1 label, and I'll change the text to pluck synth with FX. Now I can try out the whole interface. And that's the end of this quick demonstration.